When Lisa Weiss finally broke her silence, no one was ready for what came next. Her words didn't just expose a secret. They ignited a firestorm that could end everything Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb built. For years, whispers swirled behind closed doors, but Lisa brought receipts, truth, and pain the cameras never caught. What she revealed wasn't gossip. It was the kind of confession that changes lives, reputations, and legacies forever. To the world, Doug and Lisa Weiss looked like the perfect couple, the kind of marriage people prayed for. Doug was the respected Christian counselor, the man who stood on stages teaching others about love, commitment, and how to build a godly home. He had the voice, the presence, the confidence. Churches invited him, television shows wanted him, and his books were everywhere. People looked at him and saw faith in motion. They saw a man who practiced what he preached. But behind the curtain of that perfect marriage, another story was unfolding, one that few could have imagined. At home, Lisa was the quiet force holding everything together. She took care of their children, managed the house, supported Doug's growing ministry, and believed in the mission they were building. She believed in him, trusted him, and prayed for him. She thought that her sacrifices were part of serving something greater. But slowly her own voice began to fade. While Doug became more visible, Lisa became invisible. The man who spoke to thousands about emotional connection seemed unable to truly connect with the woman who shared his life. The distance didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly, through missed dinners, unanswered calls, and nights when Doug's mind was still on the stage even after the lights went out. Lisa would wait up for him, reheating meals that went untouched. When he came home, his words were brief, his eyes distracted. She tried to talk about how she felt, but Doug always had something else to do. A sermon to finish, a message to answer, another couple to counsel. He was saving marriages, but his own was quietly falling apart. The hardest part for Lisa wasn't the loneliness. It was the hypocrisy. She would sit in the audience while Doug spoke about cherishing your spouse, about listening, about love that never gives up. People would nod and clap, inspired by his wisdom, while Lisa sat there knowing those same words didn't exist in their home anymore. She wanted to believe that the man she fell in love with was still there. The young husband who used to laugh with her, pray with her, dream with her. But that man had been replaced by someone she could barely recognize. In public, their smiles told one story. In private, silence told another. Lisa became an accessory to Doug's image. The supportive wife who never complained, the background figure who helped make the picture look perfect. Every photo, every church appearance, every social media post was a piece of that illusion. She wanted to scream sometimes, to tell people that it wasn't real. But she stayed quiet, convincing herself that if she prayed harder, if she loved more, if she just waited long enough, things would change.
And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about. That Pete. The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home. That Pete is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign. I'd seen Jonathan.
Instead, the silence grew louder. The home that once felt sacred now felt hollow. Doug was busy saving souls while Lisa was trying to save her own heart. And somewhere between his fame and her faith, their marriage became a performance. Beautiful on stage, broken behind the curtain. For years, Lisa Weiss lived in silence. She had spent more than 3 decades standing behind her husband, Doug Weiss, the man who taught the world about love, loyalty, and faithfulness. People saw him as a hero of Christian marriage, a man who could save relationships with a few wise words and a confident smile. But Lisa knew another truth, one that didn't fit the story Doug told from the pulpit. Her truth was full of long nights, quiet tears, and the heavy loneliness of being unseen in her own home. She prayed, she endured, and she hoped. But hope can only survive so long in silence. The breaking point didn't come in one explosive argument or a dramatic confrontation. It came slowly, in the stillness, in the hundreds of moments when Doug would come home without really being there. Lisa would try to reach him with small gestures, a favorite meal, a soft touch, a simple question about his day. But he always had somewhere else to be. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He'd nod, smile politely, then drift back into his phone or his notes for the next conference, and Lisa, sitting across the table, began to feel like a stranger in her own marriage. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't spiritual enough. Maybe she wasn't patient enough. Maybe this was the price of being married to a man with a calling. She had heard that word so many times, calling. It began to sound like an excuse for everything she lacked. When she would tell him she felt lonely, Doug would say he understood but that God's work came first. Lisa tried to accept that, convincing herself that ministry meant sacrifice, even if it broke her heart. But one night, as she watched him prepare another sermon about intimacy and connection, something inside her shifted. The words coming from his mouth were so full of advice and emotion, yet his eyes were empty, distant. That was when Lisa realized she had been living in a performance. Their life together wasn't a partnership anymore, it was a show. He preached about love, but didn't practice it at home. He told crowds how to keep a marriage strong, while his own wife sat in silence, begging God for a reason to stay. The silence that once felt holy now felt like suffocation. Lisa's prayers changed. She no longer asked God to fix her husband. She asked him to help her see the truth, even if it hurt. And when the truth came, it was sharper than she expected. She realized that in saving Doug's image, she had lost herself. Every time she defended him, every time she smiled for the cameras, she had chipped away at her own worth. She wasn't his partner anymore. She was his prop. The courage to speak came slowly. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about survival. Lisa had spent years watching herself disappear, waiting for Doug to notice, but he never did. So she made the choice to notice herself, to step forward, to be heard. When she finally broke her silence in 2024, it wasn't a shout. It was a calm, steady voice. She didn't expose him with bitterness. She spoke her truth with grace, knowing that honesty was the only thing left to hold on to. When she sat down for her first interview, the weight of 30 years pressed against her chest. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. "I supported him," she said softly. "I believed in him. But I lost myself doing it." The world was stunned. People who had watched Doug speak about faithfulness and godly marriage suddenly had questions. How could a man so committed to teaching others about love be so disconnected at home? The story spread fast, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. Lisa wasn't a bitter ex-wife. She was a woman who had finally found her voice. After she spoke, the silence she once feared became her power. For the first time, she wasn't protecting an image. She wasn't pretending. She was free. Free from the pressure to perform, free from the guilt of not being enough, free from the illusion that her pain didn't matter. The backlash came, of course. It always does when truth touches fame. Some people called her brave. Others accused her of tearing down a man of God, but Lisa didn't respond. She had already fought too many battles in silence. This time, she chose peace over explanation. Behind the scenes, Doug continued to speak publicly about his faith and relationships. But something had changed. The world no longer saw him the same way. The words Christian marriage expert now carried a shadow. Lisa hadn't set out to destroy him. She had simply refused to keep protecting the lie. Her truth had done what years of silence never could. It exposed the cracks beneath the perfect image. As the weeks turned into months, Lisa began to rebuild. She started journaling again, something she hadn't done since she was young. The pages became her therapy, her way of remembering who she was before the fame, before the spotlight, before the silence. She began to see her own reflection again. A woman who had loved deeply, sacrificed endlessly, and finally chosen herself. She found strength in simple things: long walks, honest conversations with friends, moments of stillness where she could finally breathe without fear of saying the wrong thing. And though her story was now public, Lisa didn't seek attention. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She just wanted other women, especially those living in quiet pain, to know that it was okay to speak. That silence isn't godliness when it kills your spirit. That faith isn't blind obedience when it blinds you to the truth. That love without respect is not love at all. The breaking point wasn't the end of Lisa's story. It was the beginning. For the first time, she wasn't living in someone else's shadow. She was standing in her own light, raw but real. The same voice that had been silenced for decades had become a beacon for others. And though her marriage was over, her faith was not. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the pain and betrayal, Lisa Weiss had found something stronger than heartbreak. She had found herself. When the news broke, Lisa Weiss sat in stunned silence. It was just a photo at first. A smiling couple standing in front of a cross, holding hands, surrounded by bright lights and congratulations. Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb, married. The caption called it a beautiful new beginning. Lisa stared at the screen, not blinking, not breathing. It didn't seem real. The man she had loved, prayed for, and built a life with for over 3 decades was standing next to another woman, calling it destiny. To the world, it was a story of faith and fresh starts. To Lisa, it felt like watching her own life be rewritten in real time. She hadn't even fully processed their divorce when it happened. It had been only a few months, not years, not enough time to heal. One day she was signing the last papers, trying to make peace with what she'd lost. The next, she was scrolling through social media and seeing the same man she once shared a bed with, now posting wedding photos with a woman she already knew. That was the part that hurt the most. Joni wasn't a stranger. Lisa had seen her before, on television and at Christian events. They'd been in the same circles, the same rooms, smiling politely at each other. Never once had Lisa imagined this. As the story spread, Christian media platforms picked it up quickly. Headlines called Doug and Joni a power couple and a divine match. Comments poured in from followers saying how God's timing is perfect and how love always finds a way. Lisa read those words like daggers. Perfect timing? Love finding a way? It didn't feel like God's timing to her. It felt like betrayal dressed up as a blessing. It felt like the world had forgotten her, replaced her with someone newer, someone shinier, someone who fit better into the picture Doug wanted to show. She watched people who had once prayed with her, pastors, colleagues, church families, now publicly congratulating Doug and Joni. They called it a testimony. They used words like redemption and new chapter. No one asked Lisa how it felt. No one wanted to hear the truth. In the world they lived in, image mattered more than honesty, and Lisa was the inconvenient reminder that the story wasn't as perfect as it looked. It was easier for people to pretend she didn't exist. At night, Lisa would sit alone in her living room, scrolling through pictures of Doug's new wedding. The smiles looked genuine, the captions full of joy and scripture. She wondered how many of those words he had once said to her, about God's faithfulness, about new seasons, about being blessed. It felt cruel that the same language that once built their marriage was now being used to celebrate the one that replaced it. Every like, every comment, every repost felt like another nail sealing her out of her own story. Her children struggled too. They were old enough to see everything online, to read the comments, to feel the weight of public curiosity. They didn't know how to process it. Their father's sudden remarriage, their mother's heartbreak, the whispers that followed them in church halls and on social media. Lisa tried to stay strong for them, even as she was breaking inside. She told them that adults sometimes make choices they can't understand, but in the quiet of her room, she wept for them, for the confusion in their eyes and the loss of the family she had fought so hard to keep whole. The hardest part wasn't just losing Doug, it was being erased. For more than 30 years, Lisa had been part of his story. She had been the one beside him when he started his ministry, the one praying for him backstage, the one managing the home while he built his platform. And now, in the new version of his life, she didn't exist. She wasn't part of the testimony, not part of the journey. She was a ghost. Her decades of love and sacrifice had been edited out, replaced by captions about God's new plan. She tried to stay away from the noise, but it was impossible. The story was everywhere. Church blogs, Christian news sites, YouTube interviews, Facebook posts. Everyone had an opinion. Some called it beautiful, others called it suspicious. But for Lisa, it was personal. Every time she saw Doug and Joni smiling together, she felt a strange mix of sadness and disbelief. How could he move on so fast? How could someone preach so passionately about commitment and then start over like none of it ever happened? In the weeks that followed, Lisa started to see the truth more clearly. The marriage she had been fighting to save had already ended long before the paperwork. Doug had emotionally checked out years ago, and she had been trying to hold together something that was already gone. The wedding wasn't sudden. It was just the final chapter of a story that had quietly died long ago. That realization didn't make it easier, but it made it real. Still, there was one thing she couldn't understand. The public celebration, the smiles, the hashtags, the interviews. Why turn something so private, so painful, into a spectacle? Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was image. Maybe it was the same reason she had stayed silent for so long, because in their world, appearances mattered more than truth. Doug had built his whole career on knowing how to look good under pressure, how to turn personal stories into lessons. And now, his remarriage was the biggest performance yet. But even as the world applauded him, Lisa began to find something he couldn't take away: her own strength. It didn't come quickly. At first, it was just survival, waking up, eating, breathing, existing. Then, slowly, it became more. She started writing again, pouring her pain into words that no one else could edit or spin. She reconnected with old friends, people who saw her for who she was, not for who she had been married to. She prayed again, not for Doug to come back, but for peace to stay. One afternoon, months later, Lisa found herself walking through a small park near her home. The air was crisp, the sky clear. Children laughed in the distance. She sat on a bench, closed her eyes, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Stillness. No stage lights, no noise, no pressure, just her. And in that quiet, she realized she had finally stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. She didn't need Doug's validation or the world's sympathy. She had survived what was meant to break her. Doug and Joni's story continued to unfold online, with photos and interviews and quotes about God's new beginning. But Lisa no longer followed it. Her story was no longer tied to theirs. She had learned the hardest, most freeing truth: that sometimes losing everything you thought defined you is the only way to discover who you really are. And for the first time in decades, Lisa Weiss wasn't part of someone else's image. She was finally living her own truth. When the dust finally began to settle, Lisa Weiss found herself standing in the middle of a life she barely recognized. The marriage was gone. The name she'd carried for more than 3 decades had become a shadow of someone else's story. And the world that once revolved around ministry, appearances, and reputation had crumbled to pieces. For the first time in years, there were no interviews to watch, no comments to dread, no whispers in the church hallway, just silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy like before. It was open, peaceful, and full of something Lisa hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. In the beginning, freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like loss. The kind that makes you question who you are without the person you spent your whole life supporting. Lisa would wake up some mornings and forget that Doug wasn't there. She'd still reach for the other side of the bed, half expecting to find him. When she didn't, she'd just lie there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what it felt like to wake up as her own person. Not someone's wife, not someone's silent supporter, but simply Lisa. It was strange at first, lonely even. But slowly, it started to feel like breathing fresh air after years underground. For so long, her identity had been tied to Doug's image, his ministry, his work, his calling. She was the wife of Dr. Doug Weiss, the quiet figure behind the scenes who made everything look perfect. But once that title disappeared, Lisa began to ask herself questions she hadn't asked in years. What did she actually love? What made her feel alive? What did she want from the rest of her life? Those questions were scary, but also liberating. For the first time, she wasn't answering to someone else's expectations. There was no camera, no audience, no stage to maintain. Just truth. At first, Lisa didn't know where to begin. She started small. Morning walks around her neighborhood, journaling her thoughts, reconnecting with old friends she had lost touch with during the busy ministry years. She spent time with her children, not as the mom trying to keep everything together, but as a woman learning how to listen and laugh again. There were tears, of course, long, quiet ones that came when she least expected them. But there was also laughter, the kind that came from rediscovering simple joy. The more Lisa leaned into that stillness, the more she began to see herself clearly. She realized how much she had given up over the years: her voice, her dreams, her sense of self, all for the sake of protecting someone else's image. For decades, she had lived in the shadow of perfection, where every word was filtered and every emotion was hidden to keep up appearances. But now, there was nothing left to hide, and strangely, that felt like grace. She started to travel a little, visiting places she and Doug had always talked about but never made time for. There was no itinerary, no speaking schedule, just Lisa, her notebook, and the open road. In quiet cafes and small churches, she met women who knew her story. Women who whispered their own pain, their own stories of staying silent for too long. Lisa would listen, smile, and tell them what she had learned. That silence doesn't protect peace. It only postpones healing, and that freedom isn't found in avoiding the truth but in walking through it, no matter how much it hurts. There were moments when the past tried to creep back in. Online articles, photos of Doug and his new wife, or people who still looked at Lisa with that quiet mix of pity and curiosity. But she didn't flinch anymore. She no longer felt the need to defend herself or explain what happened. The truth didn't need to be debated. It simply existed. And in that truth, Lisa had found her strength. Her faith changed, too. It wasn't about performance anymore, or about trying to live up to someone else's version of holiness. It became personal, simple, raw, honest. She stopped seeing God as a judge waiting for her to fix everything, and started seeing him as a father who was just glad to have his daughter back. In that space, Lisa began to heal. Prayer no longer felt like begging for answers. It felt like breathing. One night, months after everything had unfolded, Lisa sat outside, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with gold and soft pink light. She realized she hadn't thought about the scandal all day. She hadn't replayed conversations or wondered what people were saying about her. For the first time, she was just there, present, unburdened, at peace. That was the moment she knew she was truly free, not because everything was fixed, but because she finally stopped trying to fix what was never hers to carry.